Hey guys, welcome to the Friday edition of the Daily Friend. That's right. This is your weekly roundup with the lads in the office. And of course, you can look forward to that podcast also coming out. Remember, you can find the podcast on the Iono website. I'll link the details to that under the video's description. And as always, Big Daddy Liberty is not alone in the studio. I'm with the fellas today. We have Gabriel Krauser, who is one of our analysts and writers here at the Institute of Race Relations. Gabriel, how are you doing?
How's it, Hitler?
We, of course, have Nicholas Lorimer, who is also one of our writers and analysts here at the IRR. Nicholas, hello. You look very warm today.
I am very warm, thank you.
Excellento. And, of course, the great economist himself. I had to think about how I'm going to buttress this one. Ian Cruikshanks, who's our chief economist at the Center of Risk Analysis. Ian,
you have already buttressed it.
There you
call
go.
me one of the lads.
Well, there you go. Perfect.
And not Meneer. So that's a great improvement.
All right, Ian, good morning to you guys. Good morning,
morning.
everybody. Let's jump straight into it. I just want the show to be quite a lively and quick one. Interesting stuff happening on the international stage. I'm going to sort of start it off in a very sort of wide lens, and then we'll zoom in, because I know, Gabriel, you have something specific you want to chat about. Look, first things first, international geopolitics at the moment, big talks around Trump's actions around Iran and North Korea, et cetera, with the big standoff perhaps earlier in the week, or was it last week, between the Iranians and Trump. And there's been a new development now with the Iranians, this time an oil tanker being seized. Gabriel, what's going on there?
Yeah, so there's this oil tanker. Originally, it was just an oil tanker, 300 meters long, huge thing, thousands and thousands of tons of oil. And it was making its way sort of from the Middle East down the east coast of Africa, around the Cape, up the west coast of Africa. It's a very long route. Where are you going? Well, then they took a little right turn into the Mediterranean Sea, past the Straits of Gibraltar, and the British authorities, with some small little boats and a bigger destroyer, very intimidating looking, said, "Where are you going?" And they said, "Don't ask us too many questions." And they said, "We ask questions." And they said, "Well, we're going somewhere." And then they said, "Okay, we're gonna seize this oil tanker." So they seized the oil tanker. They've now taken control of it. The Iranians claimed ownership of it, and they said that it was headed to Syria. Which is against regulations. Now, the way the Iranians have tried to play it off is they have said that the UK has held on to the deal that was established in 2015 with Obama as the champion of it, whereas America has reneged on the deal. And so they're saying, why are you punishing us? You're acting as if you're Americans, but you're really Brits. So you're just the little lapdogs, the little pirates acting on behalf of the United States. And the UK's response has been to say, no, this is in terms of EU regulations. You were entering EU waters, and in particular Gibraltar waters, and we've got domain over that, and we're sticking to the rules that have been laid out under the EU. And so what kind of hot take that I have off of the back of this is that I think that this might play out in the Brexit debate in an interesting way, where I think leftists are going to say, look, as long as we remain part of the EU, then we can project power without being an American lapdog. We can say we're part of the credible force of the EU. If we drop out of the EU, if we imagine that we had already had Brexit now, it would be harder for us to deal with this issue, because they'd be saying we're lapdogs of the Americans, and we'd have to say, well, yes, we are. And so they're going to say, you right-wingers, you want to project British power, you want to patrol the seas, you want to keep things safe. Well, if you really want to do that, you've got to stay part of the EU. That's a talking point that I saw the vaguest hints of emerging on BBC last night, and I imagine over the next couple of days, as this sort of scandal or this very heavy issue plays out, I think you'll see more of it, and it will play out because Tehran has summoned the British ambassador and has threatened to expel them, and has said we're going to escalate this issue. You know, if you don't give us our oil back, because the Brits have also said we might give you back the tanker and keep the oil.
And I find that actually a bit amusing, because there seems to be this cat and mouse game being played by Tehran, or the Iranians, and the rest of the world essentially. And I'm looking at you, Nick, on this one, because I want your thoughts on this. What's Iran's game here? Because it is alienating itself also amongst even the Gulf partners and the Arab League, and in addition to that, it's alienating itself from world powers. what's the game plan now, in your view?
Well, I just want to first say that Gabriel and I actually did a podcast on this very subject a little while ago. Learn Long Boy Liberty episode 3.
Absolutely, and you guys can find that. Also on the Daily Friend website, dailyfriend.co.za. Go to the podcast section. Great podcasting on there. Yep.
Yeah, it's quite long. It's almost an hour long, but we go kind of in depth about the background of Iran's geopolitical situation. It's very difficult to tell precisely what the Iranian strategy here is.
Yeah.
But one of the theories is that they're trying to kind of ratchet up the tension and push some brinkmanship by causing trouble, because then they want the powers like the United States and the EU and Britain to come to the negotiating table, and then they can kind of bog them down in negotiations until they develop a nuclear weapon. That's one theory. There are others as well. But it's very difficult to tell. What this tanker was also being sent to do, it seems, if it was being sent to Syria, is it was possibly to support either the Assad regime or the Iranian troops in Syria, because there are some, if not necessarily Iranian army, although there possibly are, there are at least Iranian allied paramilitary groups and sort of militias that are assisting the Assad regime in Syria. So its seizure has probably put a bit of a spanner in the works of whatever they're doing there.
Sorry, I thought you were going to finish or say something else. But there's a very interesting game, I think, also being played by, and I want to bring him in because you can't talk about Iran without talking about Donald Trump. And I'm gonna go to you again, Gabriel, and so on. Sorry, and we'll bring you in yourself if you have a view on this.
Yes.
Donald Trump's been playing a very different game to that of Barack Obama when it comes to the Iranians. Your thoughts on his particular approach to the Iranians?
Yeah, so I think Trump's strategy generally, the biggest difference in him and Obama is that this idea of power being nested in BATNA, the best alternative to the negotiated agreement. So here's how I get you to do something through power. I say, if you don't do my will, there's going to be severe consequences. So you see this in North Korea. It says, if you guys don't come to the table, we're going to blow you up. If you guys start firing more missiles at us, if you think about firing at Japan or South Korea, we are going to annihilate you. So that makes him seem very aggressive. But of course, when you say, if you don't go our way, it's going to be terrible, then people come to the bargaining table. That's one way to drive people to the bargaining table and make a good deal. Whereas Obama was like, look, we respect you, we like you, we see that you've got legitimate causes, so that's how we try and lure you with carrots to the bargaining table rather than chasing you with sticks. With Iran, I think Trump's basic problem with the deal that Obama struck was that it kicks the can down the road. So Iran gets to, its economy had been crushed by sanctions, and by opening the sanctions, by lifting the sanction, allowing them to trade, Iran gets to get richer. They don't have to destroy their nuclear capability. They just have to sort of delay the process by about 10 years, before which the deal gets lifted. And then as a richer state, they will be even more capable of establishing themselves as a nuclear threat in the region. And Trump's like, no, that was not a good deal. And if I want to make a better deal where I'm getting you to really change your ability to become a nuclear force, I'm going to go in with a stick. I'm going to go in and say, if you guys don't go our way, we're going to crunch you with sanctions. If you guys don't go our way, we're going to police the waters around you that are going to make it impossible for you to trade with others. We're going to police the land around you, and we're going to use our friends in the Middle East, which is something that Obama also wasn't prepared to do as much, like Saudi Arabia, explicitly sort of draw in the allies that the United States is starting to build in the region, and say we're going to use them as well to muscle you into the negotiating table. And I think that is the grander strategy that he's using. It's interesting in that context that last week, when there was this standoff with the limpet mines on the other side of the Suez Canal, that Trump was sort of ready to, Trump's military advisors were ready to pull the trigger on some major punitive action. And then Trump pulled back at the last minute, because something that's hard to see in him, I think, because he speaks so aggressively, is that he's actually quite cautious about spending treasure and blood. He doesn't. I don't think he thinks he can afford to go into an open military conflict with the Iranians. So his hands are somewhat tied. And this is, I think, a fair criticism perhaps of Trump, is that his posturing becomes incredible if it's not followed up with force. So I'm not sure that he's
I'll come to you just now, Nick. I want to throw something else in this, because I think this is actually quite an interesting debate. And I'll come to you also, Ian, in terms of, we talk about this in these grand terms, but there is an economic impact to this.
Of course
I'll
there
get
is.
to you just now, Ian. I want to throw something in here. It's been funny to see other Arab nations, that Arab League of Nations, if you will, actually begin to turn on Iran. And quite openly do it, because that was never a feature in the past. Before, maybe on, behind diplomatic doors would be that sort of rancor. But I've seen interviews of Bahrain, for example, the Saudis, openly saying, hey, listen, we're quite sick and tired of the Iranians, number one. And number two, even old foes, old traditional foes, they're warming up to. For example, Bahrain, same country, and even the Saudis have said, hey, man, we're looking to reopen ties with Israel, even.
Yeah, exactly.
And Israel, as we all know, have been a major opponent of the Iranians because of their link to Hezbollah. Nick, your thoughts?
So what you're describing there, the reason that there's this tension in the Arab world about the rise of Iran is that it's actually goes back a very long way. For a lot of Islamic history, there's been tension between the sort of Persian, Iranian part of the Islamic world and the more Arab part of the Islamic world. And there is, some people believe that the Iranians have an almost sort of racial hierarchical view that Arabs can't run themselves and that Persia is the legitimate power of the Middle East and that it should be running the show. And so there's this pull between Saudi Arabia in particular, which wants to be the leader of the Arab world, and the Iranians, who see themselves as literally the inheritors of the sort of Persian hegemony, which has been a force in the Middle East since, the Bronze Age. So this tension has risen and fallen over the centuries, but this is the latest iteration of it.
Ian, as I said, I will come to you because we talk about the politics, we talk about the possible even military action that one partner or the other can take, and there has been that sort of few attacks. For example, the Saudis were accusing the Iranians of attacking some oil fields or oil pipelines.
And drones bombed, shot out of the sky.
Absolutely, but there is obviously an economic impact when one looks at the oil price, for instance, or the potential impact on the oil price. Your thoughts on that?
First of all, one oil tanker is not just a little speck on the horizon. Its value is huge. And what's most important of all, it is almost immediately on international markets able to be converted into cash. That's a significant contribution to a war effort, if that's what they're coming to, or a forces effort. And I think this may just be the UK saying, don't think you're going to fund your military efforts in this way, and we're going to close that down. As Gabriel was saying, the forces are building against them.
Absolutely. Guys, I really did enjoy this chat. And I'm hoping in the podcast that you guys are going to record that, you might flesh it out a little bit more. And guys, remember, all of this stuff is found on the Daily Friend website, dailyfriend.co.za. Guys, I'm going to move us on to maybe a topic linked to one we just finished off now, the economy. And as Ian always says, it is the economy stupid. Ian, I'm going to go to you straight onto this one, because the Rand has been making some movements in the last month. And, we were having this chat offline, and you were essentially suggesting that, hey, maybe the Rand, it's strengthening against the dollar in particular, could be just tracking emerging markets. What is the impact on the economy and our prices?
Significant impact. If we look at where it's been within the last month, from over 15 Rand to the dollar to a touch just below 14 Rand to the dollar, and it seems to be stabilizing around about that level in the last couple of days. That would have a big impact on the cost of our imports. Now, we import a heck of a lot of the goods that we consume, that we need for development, whatever sector it's in, because our manufacturing is so slow. And I think what it means is, what it potentially means is a lower cost of living, lower inflation, lower fixed investment cost. All this could be a little bit of a fillip for the economy, and if it stays there, that's a big if, but if it should, against a dollar which is a little bit weaker than it has been against other major currencies, then perhaps that will help us to establish an opening for an interest rate cut. For at least one, and maybe it would be just marginally bigger than had been anticipated. This would be very good for consumers in South Africa. It would have a big impact. Instead of looking at higher interest rates, we could be looking at marginally lower interest rates, or at least no increase. And if we just take on to that the fact that we've just had a petrol price cut and a diesel price cut, that's a movement of all goods included in that, we could even look forward, best case outlook, if a rand stays just around 14 rand to the dollar for the same thing again in another month's time, that could be a little bit of a push up for the economy. We need it desperately.
Guys, I'm actually going to have us dwell on this topic a little bit, and I'm going to broaden it up a little bit because we're going to conclude on this topic. Guys, this is it's a little bit of a silver lining, if anything, for the consumer. But we've been saying this for a while now on the show. Much, much, much more needs to happen, especially when it comes to the necessary reforms that can keep these sort of, good movements going, so to speak. Gabriel, I'm going to start with you. We speak about reform. Here's a bit of good news. How do we build on it if we're to talk to Ramaphosa et al? How do we build on it? How do we make sure that this is the sort of news that is a feature of our economy and not just a once-off?
Yes. Well, if I were to talk to Ramaphosa, I'm afraid the best advice, most focused advice I could give him in this week is to say, you need to renege on your SONA promise. Because Ian pointed out to me earlier this week, if the fiscus last year, everyone was worried. They were like, the one thing that you cannot do is have the South African taxpayer pick up the bad debt sitting in Eskom.
Yeah.
You need to find another way to do it. And then Eskom was promised like a 20 or 30 billion rand bailout, and we were like, oh no, this is terrible. But they said, no, this is just a holdover while we're trying to find Chinese funding. The Chinese promised to take on some of that debt, and then the payments didn't go through. There's big question marks around why that didn't happen. And then in SONA, Ramaphosa basically said 230 billion rand needs to go to Eskom, which is a much huger chunk. Yes. There was a much quieter response to it, I think, because SONA was so big, because as John Kent Berman said, the unemployment numbers were literally a thumbsuck, a sort of quote from Thabo Mbeki's reference to the earlier policy documents that it was drawn from. There was a lot of other things to talk about. But what Ian pointed out to me is that if we do take on that debt burden, we as South African taxpayers, then the budget deficit is likely to go up. That and the other sort of policies that are on the book, the budget deficit is likely to go up beyond 5.5%. That is so drastic that the IMF probably wouldn't even offer us a loan to cover the gap in that situation, because they generally think you need to be 5% or lower in order to take it. So in other words, the world's lender of last resort, the guys when you're going really cap in hand, everything's terrible, please help us out. Those guys would be like, no, we can't help you out if we keep going on this track. So that's a very neat way to turn what you rightly point out is like a good bit of news into an idiosyncrasy rather than a point in a trend line going up. And another thing is anything that we do in terms of EWC, anything like that signals to Moody's that we're not serious about reform. If they give us a ratings downgrade this year, and there's so many indications to suggest that they might do that, if that happens, then we're tipping into another recession. We've got a double dip recession, and it's probably going to be a very deep one.
And let me just add some numbers into this conversation, because there is a piece right now on the Daily Friend. If you guys search on it, it's SOE's cumulative losses reach almost 100 billion rand. And the takeaway line here, according to the National Treasury, the 2019 Consolidated Financial Statements report, loss-making public entities racked up a consolidated loss of 50.6 billion rand in the 2016-17 year and 45 billion rand in the 2017-18 year. There is a big hole that needs to be filled by these cash-hungry, loss-making SOEs. And I feel as if they're the ones that literally can sink the country. Nick, sorry.
Yeah, and the problem is why this hole hasn't been filled yet is because they've acted as firstly prestige projects for the state.
Absolutely.
And the other reason is because, of course, they're part of the patronage networks. The political forces against reforming them are very powerful, because if you start cutting things, you try to make them more profitable, maybe you sell them off or privatize them, you put political allies, personal wealth generating portfolios at risk, which is something that Ramaphosa, who's in an extremely weak position in the ANC from all indications, cannot afford to do, because it might isolate particular allies in the ANC, at which point he might see the end of his presidency. So he's in a very precarious situation in that he's being pushed by the economics on one side and pushed by the politics on the other, and not really making headway either way.
Ian, thoughts?
Sure. It is a fact that the Eskom on its own could sink the national budget. And if that happens, then we have to get help from somewhere. We've got to get an inflow. It would mean a forced major change in political attitudes to the economic setup, who could we go to? The IMF, as you suggested. Could we go to China as a friendly force in our camp? Possibly. Would they be prepared to lend to us? No. We're getting into, unlikely, we're getting into a state where we would have to pledge all the family silver, and there'd be precious little left of it anyway. It's just a rush headlong into a Zimbabwe type situation. And then that happens. What about our heavy import bill? We'll find ourselves doing without fuel, with less food. Really beware of very, very frightening social consequences.
Guys, maybe as we look to doing final comments, maybe in your comment, let's look to 3 top reform agendas that you would punt to address these sort of issues. Gabriel?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to SOEs, you've got to cut. If the chairman of the ESCOM board says, Jabu Mbuza says 33% of our employees are redundant, you need to cut them. If SAA is just a glory project, you need to sell it off. Absolutely. You need to recoup some of those those gains. So it's privatization of non-key assets. It's streamlining of ones that we can't privatize fully right now. And the third thing is to rethink the patronage network. Milton Friedman, I'm going to say it again, he has this idea of the closest thing you can get to a free lunch. There is unfortunately no such thing as a free lunch. Nothing is for mahala in this country or any other country. But the closest thing that you can get is to punish, is to have pain concentrated amongst people that have been eating from the trough of the state payer, cut them out and have maximized gain. And that's exactly what Ramaphosa would get. I agree with Nicholas that he is in a precarious position, but I disagree with him if he's implying that Ramaphosa is going to stay strong by avoiding the closest thing to the free lunch. He's going to get stronger if he cuts the patronage network that is an anchor weighing this country down and lets us go forward, because then come next national election, he will be beloved for the very good reason that he's done something and not just for hope.
Absolutely. I was about to say, he would actually have public sentiment behind him as things improve, because that's
and
what
it's a
people
democracy.
want.
This is how you really hold power.
Absolutely.
Exactly. And this is the key point, is that Ramaphosa he may be tempted by the political forces currently in play to make short-term decisions on this, which is to delay this. But as Ian and Gabriel pointed out, this has all the makings of a spectacular crisis that could significantly change the political situation in the country. So if he wants to keep the status quo as him in power, he needs to take the short-term risks and take the pain now, because otherwise he's going to have a much bigger problem down the road.
And he's got the time now. It's 5 years before the next election.
Absolutely. Three reform areas that you could want to suggest?
I think Gabriel covered them pretty well, but the other thing we need to do is make sure that the economy is growing again. Because if the economy is growing again, then it does mean that there's more tax revenue coming into the fiscus, which will alleviate a lot of these problems and mean that you don't have to cut so aggressively.
It's a major move away from our present outlook, and it's built on hope. Hope is not a viable strategy, and I think it's about time we moved past that and did something definite. And I think the suggestion that we say the head of ESCOM, the head of all of the SOEs have got to say that's the number of jobs that got to be cut. Do it. Until we do that, we're going to flounder in very dangerous waters.
Guys, thank you very much. I'm going to end this one here. It's been a very nice conversation for a Friday. I hope you guys enjoyed it, because I certainly did. And to keep enjoying this content, guys, remember, support our work. You can do that by reading our content on the Daily Friend website, dailyfriend.co.za. Remember to share the material too. Put it out to your friends on your social networks, so that more and more people can read this analysis and basically arm themselves with the good arguments around how we can address the ills of our society, if anything. And more than that, please support our work by becoming a friend of the IRR. You can do that by SMSing your name to 32823, and SMS will cost you R1. Terms and conditions do apply. And join the other South Africans who are donating between 70 and 90 Rand a month to keep these guys going. And we do need these guys. I mean, what would we be without, Lur and Longboy Liberty? Speaking about Low and Long Boy Liberty, that's one of our podcasts here in-house with the two chaps over here. I'm sure there'll be an episode 5 coming out soon enough on that. But of course, these gentlemen will be producing a podcast today, on these and other topics. There's also a white privilege discussion I want to hear in that podcast. But guys, remember, if you also want to support us and you don't do SMSs, you can find us online. Simply log on to irr.org.za/join, and you can sign up a monthly debit order there. Guys, look out for the Big Liberty Show. I am putting out an episode sometime this weekend, including a Blacks Only episode. Guys, enjoy your Friday. Happy weekend. We'll see you on Monday.